The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Chapter 3. Dr. Cuss interviews the stranger. The stranger seldom left the house in the next few months. Mr. Hall wanted him to find another inn, but Mrs. Hall wouldn't hear of it. "We never have visitors this time of year," she protested. "Especially ones that give us so many extra shillings. Wait until the artists come during the summer. Then we'll ask him to leave." Although Mrs. Hall rarely had a conversation with the stranger, she observed him each day. Some days he would work and talk to himself every waking moment. Other days she would hear him pacing the floor and smashing bottles. He never ventured out at daylight. But when twilight came, he would often go for a walk. His path of choice was the loneliest roads and deserted paths. Those who happened to come upon him would rush home and tell their families of the strange sight they had seen. He became the topic of conversation in the sleepy town of Epping. Mrs. Hall felt sorry for the man and was certain he suffered great tragedy. However, most people believed he was a criminal who was wrapping himself up so he could hide from the police. This was the story Teddy Henfrey believed and the story he often told. Some didn't know what to think. No matter what was thought of him, all agreed that they disliked him. He proved irritable and often displayed frantic gestures when spoken to. One villager had a particular interest in the stranger. The town doctor, Dr. Cuss, wondered, what was wrong with this man that he required bandages from head to toe? When his curiosity got the best of him in May, he set out to pay the stranger a visit. "I'd like to see your visitor, Mrs. Hall. What's his name?" Dr. Cuss said. "Oh, he doesn't like visitors. He wants his privacy." She rubbed her chin. "I didn't quite hear his name when he told me." The truth was, he never offered a name and she never asked. Standing there with the doctor now and not being able to give a name to the stranger made Mrs. Hall feel foolish. Dr. Cuss walked upstairs past Mrs. Hall and knocked on the stranger's door. He opened the door and walked inside. "Pardon the intrusion," Cuss said. Mrs. Hall placed her ear to the door but could only hear muffled voices. Suddenly, she heard a cry of surprise, a crashing chair, a bark of laughter, and the door swung open. Dr. Cuss appeared with a look of horror on his face. He rushed past Mrs. Hall, and when Mrs. Hall peered inside the room, she saw nothing. Although she saw nothing, the sound of soft laughter could be heard. Before she had a chance to step inside, the door slammed, and the place was quiet again. Cuss ran straight to the home of Reverend Bunting. He burst into the kitchen and asked, "Am I mad? Do I look insane?" Reverend Bunting tried to settle Cuss down. "What happened? Start at the beginning." "I went in to see the stranger at the inn. I pretended to ask for a donation to the nurses' fund. But when I opened the door, he shoved his hands into his pockets. He sat in his chair and sniffed a few times. He obviously had a cold. As I spoke to him about the fund, I looked around the room. There were bottles and test tubes everywhere. I kept talking, all the while trying to observe every inch of the room. "Will you donate?" I asked. He said he'll think about it. Then I asked him if he was working on a secret project. He became quite crossed, but I pushed on with my questions. He became furious. "What are you trying to find out?" he demanded. As he rose, one of the papers in the air carried itself to the fireplace. As he reached for it, his hand shot forward. "But you see, That's just it. There wasn't a hand. I didn't think there was an arm either, just a sleeve, an empty sleeve. Reverend Bunting pulled his chair closer and raised his eyebrows. Although surprised, I figured he had a fake arm and had removed it, Cuss continued. But when I looked again, I realized there wasn't anything holding up the sleeve. I could see straight in. I tell you, nothing was there. Good God, I said, staring at his sleeve. The stranger stopped and stared at me with his blue goggles. Then he looked at his sleeve. Then what happened? Asked Reverend Bunting. That's all. He never said a word. He just glared and put his sleeve back into his pocket. I was almost speechless, but my words finally came to me. How can you put an empty sleeve like that into your pocket? An empty sleeve you saw, did you? He asked. Certainly, I said. Then very quietly, he pulled his sleeve out of his pocket again. He raised it towards me as though he would show me again. He did it very, very slowly, and I looked at it. Well, I said, clearing my throat, there's nothing in it. I had to say something as I was feeling frightened. He extended it until the cuff was 6 inches from my face. I can assure you, it's a very odd thing to have an empty sleeve come at you. And then something, a finger or a thumb, nipped my nose, tweaked it. Reverend Bunting started to laugh. You must believe me, said Dr. Cuss. There wasn't anything there. You can laugh, but I assure you it was real and terrifying at that. I was so startled that I hit his cuff hard and ran out of the room. Cuss took a sip of water. I tell you, it felt exactly like hitting an arm. But that's just it. There wasn't an arm. None at all. Reverend Bunting thought it over. He looked wise and grave indeed. That is the most remarkable story, he said. A most remarkable story indeed.